A lot of us as human beings, we go down pathways in an attempt to find our why, thinking that that's our why, but it's not really our why. We're throwing ourselves in environments to see if that is our why, which is why the work of figuring out what it truly is in fact, I think, pretty good and honest work.
What drives success under pressure? Today, I'm speaking with retired Navy SEAL Rich Diviney to explore the hidden attributes behind optimal performance and the power of finding your why.
Raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness.
Rich Diviney, retired Navy SEAL commander and author of The Attributes, reveals the traits that lead to success in high-stress environments. He's also worked with Simon Sinek to help individuals and teams discover their purpose and unlock their potential. Rich, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here, brother.
Yeah, excited to get in this conversation. I think it's really important for our audience to hear, and I know they're all going to benefit from hearing what you've done in your work in the SEAL teams, and then everything that you've been doing since you got out. So, that said, like I said right before I hit record, we're just going to do a one breath grounding practice for us and for the audience. And what that looks like is we're just going to get comfortable, whatever that looks like for us. And if that includes closing your eyes, I invite you to do so. And then just let's exhale together, focusing on the physical attributes of that breath. And then a nice, long, slow, deep breath in, holding at the top, and exhaling and letting go. All right. And bring some movement back into your body and blinking your eyes open if they were closed. And man, we're just going to jump right in, brother. So, I was mentioning before I hit record, when I first got out, I moved out to Colorado Springs, and your book was one of the first ones I picked up. I think it was fresh off the press, 2020. So The Attributes, what inspired you to write The Attributes? And then how would it differ from other books on performance and leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're going to resonate with this because the first thing that inspired me, or I guess the first inkling of curiosity for me, was when I got through SEAL training, when I got through BUDS, and I think I was you said you were 239, I think you said. I was 210, so a little bit a few classes before, but I in normal fashion, I think we started with 170 people and we graduated 38 people, and you and I know those are normal numbers, like 85-90% attrition. But I remember looking around me at the people who I was with, at 38 people, and asking myself, how the hell am I still here? Like, what is it? I mean, I had what I call very healthy imposter syndrome right away. And it actually, I carried that throughout my career. And I felt that it always, because I call it healthy, because it always allowed me to say, hey, I want to make sure I'm doing my absolute best for these people around me. I'm living up to what I believe they are. So, but all that to say is what I asked myself, how are we similar, and how might be dissimilar to those guys who didn't make it? And then, of course, as I went through my career, and we parallel a little bit, but I was put in charge of the selection and assessment for development group. And part of the charter for me when I was put in charge of that was I was tasked to articulate why some guys were not making it through. You know about that selection process that some of the top dudes go. I mean, it's really a lot of top dudes go and try out for that command, but not everybody makes it. Just 50%.
I tried out, didn't make it.
Yeah,
I'm one of those
50%
guys.
attrition. And the key is it's not that you made it because you're not a great SEAL. Yet the way that the command up till that point had been describing why guys weren't making it was unhealthy. It was kind of like they were describing skills, like they were trying, well, I couldn't shoot very well, couldn't do that, and it seemed disingenuous. And so I into digging into, okay, I think what we're doing is we're looking for specific qualities that each individual has to have. And you know as well as I do that even specific missions in the SEAL teams require specific qualities, these attributes. Combat diving requires a lot more patience than, say, hostage rescue. And so someone who's very high on patience may not be as deft in hostage rescue as they might in combat swimming. But yet both are very critical missions. And so all this to say, I really began to get this fascination with what are the qualities. The best teams build their teams based on whether or not the team members have what it takes to do the job, not necessarily that they know how to do the job. And it was hearkened to me with a couple examples when I started to do this work. First, This is 2010. And we know, and your audience knows because they're familiar with SEALs and SEAL training. You spend hundreds of hours running around with big, heavy boats in your head and buds. You spend hundreds of hours exercising with 300-pound telephone poles, running around those things, freezing at the surf zone. By this time, by 2010, when I was doing this work, I had already been on hundreds of missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I can tell you with certainty that never on one of them did I carry a big, heavy boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole, right? So I knew that what they were doing to us in those moments at Buds they weren't training us to be Navy SEALs. They were putting us in these specific environments to tease out these qualities. So that was number one. Number two, as I was having a conversation with an older guy, an older SEAL, and he had been an instructor years and years ago. And he told me, Rich, there's a story about a kid who showed up to Navy SEAL training one day years and years ago. And he walked into the instructor's offices and he said, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And the instructor said, okay, you have to do a swim test. And the kid said, fine. So they took him out to the pool. And it was an easy test, 50 meters, so 25 meters to one end, 25 meters back to the other end. Anyway, the kid gets all ready to go. He jumps in the pool and he immediately sinks to the bottom of the pool. And he starts walking across the bottom of the pool to one end. He touches one end, walks across the bottom of the pool back to the other end. He comes up, he's gasping for air, and the instructor says, what the hell are you doing? And the kid, who's still trying to catch his breath, looks at the instructor and says, I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim. And at that point, the instructor pauses and he looks at the kid and says, that's okay, we can teach you how to swim. And so the idea is, why did the instructor say that? He said that because he knew if this kid had the qualities, the attributes to show up to Navy SEAL training and he didn't know how to swim, he had everything inside of him he needed to be a Navy SEAL. Teaching him the skill of swimming was going to be easy. And so what I realized when I was putting together that training, or kind of not even revamping, articulating the training, was that we had to change our languaging. We had to start using a different language of performance that was attributes, not just skills. And then when I got out of the Navy and started working in the leadership space and working with businesses and teams and organizations, I recognized that businesses and teams and organizations were having the same problem articulating this stuff. You hear things like soft skills or character traits or whatever. And I said, people, they don't know what these are, and I'm going to help them understand it. And so the impetus was writing a book to help people, regular people, everyday people, understand what those key qualities are that drive our performance at very elemental levels.
I love it. And I've got another question to follow up on the skills versus attributes piece, but I have to go back to something that I think I heard Coleman Ruiz say on, who did he interview with? Huberman. I think he went on.
Huberman, good friend of
mine. Yeah, he's solid. I did a pump with him back in 2007 as an augment. And he said that when they looked around at the folks, I think he was a phase one officer. They looked at the guys who made it through Hell Week and the attributes, if you will, that they all had in common, or they had they had one of three things. They had gone through, their parents had split in a divorce. They had been arrested at some point, or they had been suspended from school. I think those were the three. Not great attributes, but I can admit I got suspended from school, and since I've also been arrested, I've got two of the three. But I doubt that's something that you want to put on any type of interview process or evaluation.
The question becomes, what are the attributes that induce that type of behavior? And I would admit, I don't think before I went to Buds I had any one of those happen. However, I was close to that. I was breaking rules all the time. So it's really that rule breaker mentality. Whether or not you get caught, I guess, is a little bit of luck. But what are the attributes that induce that type of activity? And I think there's things like cunning. There's things like confidence. You and I, we could go through the courage. There's a bunch of stuff that seeds itself into that type of attitude of people who just go for it. And again, I haven't broken the code. I haven't cracked the code. I really haven't worked on the code of what attributes are the ones that every guy who makes it through SEAL training has. But I will tell you that I know there's one specific attribute that every single SEAL that makes it through has an abundance of, and that's compartmentalization. And if you aren't able to compartmentalize to a very, very effective degree, you're going to quit day one. You're certainly going to, even if it's a Nobel, you start a Nobel Hell Week, which I think we did. We didn't have any quitters until Hell Week, right? Once Hell Week starts, that's going to happen because the ability to block out everything else and focus on one thing at a time, even to include pain and misery, is absolutely essential to making it through SEAL training. And then, of course, even more essential to actually do the job and the work. So out of the 41, I know that that's one of them. But I'm sure that there's other ones that attribute to that that thing that Coleman said. So
yeah. Well, so you mentioned the difference between an attribute and a skill, and I think just in the conversation we're starting to see what the difference there, what they are. But could you put a definition on the two, or maybe the Venn diagram where they may overlap, or where there's no overlap, that kind of thing?
absolutely, yeah. Just to put it as plainly as possible, a skill is not inherent to our nature. They're not inherent to our nature. None of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball or shoot a gun. We're trained to do those things. We're taught to do those things. Skills direct our behavior in known and specific environments. Here's how and when to throw a ball, ride a bike, shoot a gun. And then because they're very easy to see, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see how well anybody does any one of those things. You can put scores around skills. You can put statistics around skills. You can put skills on resumes, which is why we get seduced by skills often when we're picking teams or even performance evaluating. The problem is skills don't tell us how we're going to show up in stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill. And so this is when we lean on attributes. Attributes, on the other hand, are inherent to our nature. All of us are born with levels of patience, situation awareness, adaptability. Now, we can certainly develop those things over time and experience. However, you can see levels of this stuff in very small children. Anybody who has kids or has, even hung out with kids will agree with me when I say there are 1.5-year-olds who are patient and there are 1.5-year-olds who are impatient. So there's a nurture nature element to attributes. Attributes don't direct our behavior. They inform our behavior. They tell us how we're going to show up to an environment. So my son's levels of perseverance and resilience informed the way he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike. And he was falling off.
Man,
right?
Great.
And finally,
I'm living that right now with my kids.
Yeah. And then finally, they are, because they're difficult to see, they're very difficult to assess, measure, and test. How can you assess someone's levels of adaptability or patience? Now, they show up the most visibly and viscerally during times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty, which made the laboratory of BUDS or even the training I was running at Dev Group perfect, because everything about SEAL training is throwing guys into stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because our job is, in fact, not about the shooting and the skydiving and the scuba diving. It's about dropping into chaos and performing. And we are, in fact, what I call masters of uncertainty, which, by the way, is the title of my second book, which is out. It's going to be out in about a month, which I'll show it to you. We can talk about that. But the idea is, the difference is if we don't consider attributes in our performance picture, we're missing a huge part. And one of the things that really drives me, because you and I got a gift, okay? And I think, yes, we volunteered for it, but we got a gift because the attributes show us who we are at our very most raw, our rawest self, and we got a gift of understanding that about ourselves by day 1 or day 2 of BUDS training. I mean, we started to understand ourselves at our very most raw, and we started to understand our teammates at their most raw. And that's a superpower when it comes to our own performance and our team's performance, because we know exactly who we are and how we're going to show up when the shit completely hits the fan and we're in the most chaotic. We actually have an edge on everybody else. And so this understanding of our attributes, if we understand this, we begin to understand who we are at our most raw, how we prioritize these qualities. And it shows us that, it's not about our personality or, again, I love personality tests. I've taken almost all of them. And I think they're great. I really do. The problem is personality, when the shit hits the fan, personality goes out the window. Right. And we know that, my wife, we've been married 23 years. She's a super lovely, bubbly, gregarious person, cheery. When the shit hits the fan, that all goes out the window, right? She is running on attributes, as we all are. And so that's the importance of this stuff. We start to understand our levels of performance at very raw levels for ourselves and our teams.
That's really eye-opening, to be honest. Like, again, I've read your book, but it was 4+ years ago. And just coming back to that, I can see that difference in, and not just SEALs, but I can see it in a lot of people. And because they are, would you say, masters of chaos, they are able to adapt. And you said compartmentalization is one of the things that's common across the SEAL community or across high performers. And clearly, adaptability, resilience. What are some of the surprising attributes that you found to be essential to success? One that's often overlooked.
Well, so here's what's surprising. What's surprising that I found after we've been doing work now for 4 years and all over the world, is that there's no one attribute that's better than the other attribute. There's no judgment to these things. And for example, when you take our assessment, by the way, I'm going to send you my assessment, our assessment. You can take it, and we'll give your audience a coupon code so they can take it. But when you get the assessment, or when you take the assessment, you'll get your attributes ranked from 1 to 41. So in other words, what are your top 5 all the way down to your bottom 5? And what we'll do is we'll say, okay, when you look at that, you have to understand that take it with no judgment, and begin to understand that this is a fingerprint of your performance, and that this top 5 and these bottom 5 are not your strengths and your weaknesses. In fact, your success in life is because as much because of your top 5 as it is your bottom 5. You are successful because you're low in these attributes. Now, the flip side of that is, in proper introspection, we also ask ourselves, okay, how can being high on these these top 5 also how might it impede me? What might be my blind spots? How might it not serve me?
Sure.
Same with your bottom 5, because what
just
happens,
like you mentioned with the assault versus the combat swimmer, right?
For someone, for example, who has decisiveness in their top 5, right, and patience in their bottom 5. Right, we can say, well, the strength of that, this is a person who's going to make decisions very rapidly, and they're not going to wait. They can move pretty quickly. What's a blind spot? They may make decisions too rapidly. They may not actually take the pause when they need to take the pause. So all of these attributes, even though they're kind of our the way it ranks on your assessment will be the way you unconsciously behave. All of us as human beings, we're constantly, depending on environment, dialing up or dialing down attributes to relate to our environment. So in other words, the person who's low on patience might be at home dialing up their patience for their kids deliberately. They might be deliberately dialing up their patience. One of my friends took this attribute, the assessment. Number 1 was humor. That was his number 1 attribute, which you and I were like, man, that's fucking awesome, right? That's great. However, I said, hey, are there times you need to dial that down? He said, oh, yeah, there are times I need to dial that down because the environment is not going to appreciate the joke I have to tell, right? So you're dialing that down. So we're constantly dialing these up and dialing them down, but that's taking conscious effort on our part. And so what we want to understand is really, how do we unconsciously behave, and where does this stack? And there's no judgment there, right? It's just the way I talk about this is, first of all of us have all of the attributes. But we all have different levels. We all have different ways they stack up. And second of all, we're all like cars. But some of us are Jeeps, some of us are SUVs, and some of us are Ferraris. And that's no problem, because the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do, and the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do. But it behooves us to figure out what we are running with, so we understand what our unique performance fingerprint looks like. And then we understand how we behave, and we understand how we can actually start teaming in ways that are extremely, extremely powerful.
Yeah, I love that analogy with the Ferrari versus the Jeep, man. My wife and I just bought her an ultimate car driving experience, and I've done like the one where you kind of drive around the parking lot, but this one's a 65-mile drive in McLarens and Aston Martins and things. But there's no Jeep. I said, you guys should get like a Land Cruiser or some type of Jeep, and also get that to be a part of it. So I love that analogy.
Whereas, by the way, if I were to describe myself as a vehicle, I'd be the Jeep, because I'm really tough, but I'm also really slow. I'm not fast at all, but I could be rugged. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So I want to transition to the other piece, that finding your why, and I know that there's some overlap here between the attributes and finding the why. So as I mentioned in the intro, you work with Simon Sinek. He's fairly famous, if you will, for helping people find their why. We've always heard him do the start with why. So how do attributes tie into one understanding their deeper purpose?
Yeah, it's a great question. By the way, I think Simon and we talked about our timelines. I met Simon when I was probably 2014. I was back at Development Group. I was able to contact him and brought him to the command to speak. And then I brought him to Little Creek as well. So I'm not sure if you were there when I brought him to Little Creek to speak.
No, I've never seen him in person.
Yeah.
Man, I would love to.
But we became fast friends, and still are to this day. And I think one of the things that intrigued me about what he was doing, and what I did a little of when I got out, was this idea of finding your purpose. I would say the purpose, the why, is what drives us in terms of a holistic vision, and the attributes are almost you have the why, the hows, and the whats. The attributes are almost the how we get it done. So in other words, our purpose is, I want to help maximize potential for human beings, right? The way I do that, the how I do that is expressed through the attributes, is through the qualities, because that's the kind of the engine that the how I do that. Or it's how I do that, and then the what's are what I do. So the things that I actually do, but even the things I actually do, those are all buttressed. Everything we do is buttressed by the attributes. It informs our behavior as we do those what's, and so I think understanding one's purpose allows for a clarity and a cardinal direction that is very powerful. And then understanding one's attributes allows someone to say, okay, I know how I'm going to be attacking this or attacking this problem, and how I'm going to be executing the what's that will take me to my purpose, or will help me achieve my purpose. That's the way I just describe that relationship,
And for someone struggling to find their why, the show is Men Talking Mindfulness, and as I mentioned before we hit record, my co-host is on Thanksgiving break, so it's just the two of us, but we believe, and I'm sure others believe, that mindfulness is this kind of overarching, encompassing umbrella, right? Underneath which wellness falls, leadership, emotional intelligence, but also deep introspective work. And I imagine that finding your why requires quite a high level of that introspective work. Like, where do people start to find their why? And maybe if you could answer, what questions should they be asking themselves?
Yeah. The couple things to just emphasize that, because I want to emphasize the importance of mindfulness. So you mentioned Huberman. Andrew Huberman and I have been friends for about 7 or 8 years. He and I got together right after I got out of the Navy and began to work on a bunch of stuff together. In fact, my second book we'll talk about is a lot of stuff we worked on together. But he and I used to talk about this idea, and what he used to say is, I like the word mindfulness, but what I don't like about it is when you look at the opposite, it's mindlessness. But I think there's some accuracy in there. So I think the importance of mindfulness is to conduct yourself on a daily basis where you are not mindlessly moving through life, right? You're just at the whim of the environment or reaction. So I think that's the importance of that. I think in terms of understanding or finding one's why, one of the best ways to begin doing it is to start thinking about examples or stories from your life where you felt like you were living your best self and showing up as your best you. The kicker is that might not be a happy story. It might actually be a story of trauma or distress, but you are still showing up as your best self. You're still showing up as kind of the best version of yourself. And the idea is, if you think about and can articulate or even write down, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these examples of your life, and you start thinking through those with deliberacy and with precision and with as much detail as possible, you will start to begin to see threads of those things that are important to you. Because every time we're living our best self and conducting ourselves at the kind of the highest level we feel like we are living in congruence with what drives us and our purpose. And those starts to give you hints of that idea. Now, there's processes. There's a process that Simon developed in terms of taking someone through and understanding their why. It's a process that they run in their business, but they also have a book. I mean, he published a book called Find Your Why, and in that book, there's a step-by-step process to do that. But I think that's one piece of this. The other thing that I would offer, and this is where I actually get into this piece in my second book, is I think one of the things we have to understand about ourselves is our identity. Our identity drives our behavior very, very precisely and very noticeably. And what I mean by identity is those things that we put after the two words, the two words "I am." I always classify the words "I am" as the most powerful words in the human language, because anything you put after those two words is what drives your whole behavior. It drives your conscious, it drives your reality. I am, whatever that is, drives it. And so what we have to recognize about ourselves as humans is that as we go through life, we actually stack on a bunch of I ams, a bunch of identities. And they can be anything. They can be anything. They can be, I went to this high school. I was captain of the motocross team. I'm a Navy SEAL. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a Metallica fan. I'm a Harley Davidson. Whatever those things are, right? Every one of those identities we stack on ourselves actually comes with rules and conditions, and in some cases biases that allow us to be that identity, because part of an identity is being part of a group, whatever that is. And so the reason why this is important is because what I've found is that in life, but certainly during uncertainty, challenge, and stress, we will always behave towards whatever identity we have prioritized the highest. Okay. Now, for you and I'm not sure when you became a father and husband, but for me,
7 years ago.
7 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So for me, I got my wife and I got married in 2001, right before 9/11. And then our first kid was 05. So it was a lot of combat that I saw as a husband and father. But what I'll tell people is that, when I was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, for most of the time, my Navy SEAL identity was the one on top. That was the one I prioritized because that was the environment that it required. However, there were times in combat, and I saw this in my guys as well, where a situation would happen overseas, and immediately you see a prioritization of husband and father, right? So in other words, you go into a building, there's a bad guy there, you have to do what you need to do with that bad guy, but then there are women and children in that same building, and suddenly husband and father takes priority, and you are acting in a whole different. You're acting in a way that is caring and taking care of those people. And so I think what we have to understand is if we do some work to understand the identities we carry, all of them, and what in the book I talk about, hey, make a list of as many I am statements as you can, and don't be spare on this. I mean, the littlest thing, Metallica fan, Taylor Swift or groupie, whatever that is. Even I said in the book, I hate Nickelback. That's an identity that's going to form some. That's an identity that's going to form some behavior and biases to what you do, right? But all of it, and just start asking yourself, okay, out of all these identities, how do I prioritize these, and where do I prioritize them? I think the healthiest among us, either veterans or SEALs, we can stick to SEALs because that's the community we know. But the healthiest among us, who in fact are husband and fathers, are the SEALs who, for example, transitioned from the SEAL teams in a very healthy way because their SEAL identity, when that went away, they had a husband and father identity to fall back on. There was no big deal, right? There was a dearth there. But, husband, because we joke, Navy SEAL, people like, once a Marine, always a Marine. That's not the case with Navy SEAls. It's just not. For us, it's earn your trident every day. And as soon as you take off that trident, you're not really earning it every day, right? You and I don't consider ourselves SEAls. For us, it's like, no, the guys out there doing the job today, they're the SEAls, right? So it's a huge dearth in identity. But I think if you are cognizant of those other identities, it gives you some backup and some foundation on which you can rest. Certainly did for me coming out of the Navy. But B, it gives you some confidence in saying, oh, you know what? I'm going to build a new identity. I'm going to build a new identity of author, of entrepreneur, of whatever that is. And you start working towards that. But I think those types of introspections can actually help define your purpose as well.
Man. Yeah. I've never thought about that aspect of transition. I had 2 children when I transitioned out in 2020. So in 2020, I had a then 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And then we've had number 3 since then. But looking back on that transition, I think you're spot on. That was my new mission. And I would like to think that was my priority when I was in the teams. But in all honesty, the teams become your priority for a lot of us. I always joke, right?
The Navy, you can tell the Navy all day long that my husband and father is my priority. And they're like, nope, sorry. You were deploying you, and guess what your priority is? So, yeah. So you do your best, right?
Exactly.
So I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about kind of identifying our individual whys and using our attributes to do that. As far as leaders, how can leaders use the concept of a why to kind of inspire and align their teams?
Yeah. Well, I think purpose matters. A why and the purpose matters, and people will align and perform and behave way more effectively towards a purpose than just a thing. In other words, you could tell a team, "Hey, we're gonna make this much money this quarter." That's the thing. Or you can say, hey, our purpose is to help as many people as we possibly can with our product, right? And we are just designed as humans to move towards those types of purposes in a much more inspired way. And so, but all of this to say, you have to have a shared sense of purpose, because if you don't have a shared sense of purpose, that team cannot function effectively, even certainly together, but they are but especially when they're not together, when they're in different desperate areas. You cannot align a team unless the team's purpose is aligned. It's like that flock of geese flying for the winner, right? I mean, and we know that lead goose doesn't stay in the front the whole time, because that lead goose is getting like 75% of the wind resistance. That lead goose switches out. The other thing that's interesting about geese, just to stay on this for a second, is that in the formation, of the V formation of geese, if a goose becomes sick, lame, or injured, that goose has to drop out of the formation. Another goose always goes with that goose, always, every time, and will stay with that goose until either that goose is ready to go again, or is deceased, right? But assuming that happens, right? Assuming that the goose just had to throw up or something, right? But then the goose is fine. Those two geese will then rejoin the flock. The only way they know how to do that is because they know what the flock's sense of purpose is and mission is. And so take it into our world. I mean, we had to conduct asymmetric warfare, which meant we had units and teams and guys out on the battlefield in all different locations. It was never one line where we knew, oh, this is where we all, and we're just marching forward. And the trust of being able to say, hey, that person is out there, and that person is going to have to make decisions without coming back to me because there's no time. The only way I could trust that could happen, and they could trust they could be making the right decision, is if they know the purpose, if they know the cardinal direction of what we're sparked to do. There's overall purpose. There's also the mission objective and things like that.
Sure.
It's more granular, but we can't do that. You can't operate a team in any environment, especially when you're broken apart or not together, if you don't have a shared sense of purpose.
Is there such thing as people identifying the wrong why?
That's a great question. In the work that I've seen done, I would say if someone's why is done in a genuine, authentic way, it's going to be real for them. It's going to be real, but it has to be genuine. It has to be authentic, and they have to honor the process. And they have to be and I think this is where it gets nuanced, and I'd recommend anybody who's interested reading that book, because there's nuances there. A why is not around a number that or an amount of money that I'm going to make. That's a result of things. So the why generally comes from this sense of inspiration. It usually has to do with other people. And in many cases, most cases, helping other people, right? But it generally always involves other people, involves a much higher level sense of vision and motivation that deals with other people, deals with something more than just a number. Because again, getting that number. So someone might think, oh, my why is to make a lot of money. No, that's a result. I mean, what's actually happening? If making a lot of money does in fact bring you closer to your why, which we don't know, why does it bring you closer to your why? Well, because it allows me to give more to the homeless, or allows me the space to go contribute time or do some art or whatever. Okay, now you're getting to your why. It's a means. The numbers are a means to an end. So I don't think anybody would have the wrong, or their why wouldn't necessarily be wrong. It might be misaligned based on how they did the process, I would say.
Yeah. I've spoken about this on the show before, and I have to be completely honest here when I unpack this piece. But my why for going into the SEAL teams, I believe, was originally seriously misguided. I had seen the movies and everything that Hollywood shows you, and there was a deep insecurity in me, and I felt that I needed to validate myself, validate my existence, and by being one of the best, I felt then I would be validated. That was my why back in the day. Since then, it's certainly changed a whole bunch of times. My why was working for my men as a leader, working for them. My why was enabling them to do the job. My why was serving this great country. So whys can change, but I think that original why may have been misguided. Maybe wrong is probably a strong word, but
Yeah.
misguided.
Yeah. Or
But
maybe I think just not defined properly. I think, I think becoming a SEAL for all of us was a means to an end. And oh, by the way, welcome to the club in terms of guys becoming SEALs for those reasons. In fact, I don't know. I talk about narcissism as one of the attributes, and narcissism is an attribute. It's one of the 41. All of us have all of it. And let me just give you the narrative on this because I think it'll resonate with you and the audience. But um, when I was researching it's a drive, it's one of the drive attributes. In the category drive. I was researching what are the drivers of human performance, what really drives. And I kept on actually coming back to narcissism, but I was avoiding it for the same reasons why most people avoid it. It's because when we see narcissism, we think narcissistic personality disorder. That's what we think, a codified disorder in the DSM-5. So I bought a copy of the DSM-5, and I bought that thing. I opened it up to the pages on narcissistic personality disorder. And in those pages, you'll find that there are 9 criteria that the physician will read through. And if the physician can answer yes to 5 or more of those 9, the physician can consider that patient disordered, right? 5 or more considers the patient disordered. But here's the thing. Only about 6% of the population have the disorder. And what I did is I read through those 9 things. And as I read through those 9 things, I could not say yes to 5 or more. However, I was not innocent of everything I was reading. I was like, oh, wait a second. Sometimes I feel like this. Sometimes I feel like that. So then I backed it up a little bit. I said, okay, well, why the heck did I become a Navy SEAL in the first place? Okay. It was, mid 90s. I was a 22-year-old kid, nothing really going on in the world. I was a patriot. Of course, I wanted to serve my country. But when I was really honest with myself, one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to try to be a Navy SEAL was because I wanted to try to see if I could be a badass. I wanted to try to see if I could do something very few people could do. Then I asked a bunch of my teammates why they became Navy SEAls. And they said the exact same thing. Yes, I'm a patriot. Yes, but I wanted to see if I could do something very few people could do. Okay. So then I backed it up even further and asked myself, okay, what is the elemental definition of narcissism? Just the basic elemental definition. The basic elemental definition of narcissism is the desire to stand out, be recognized, be adored, be unique, feel special. Okay. Every single psychologist on the planet will tell you that every single human being on the planet at some point in their lives wants to stand out, be unique, feel special, be adored. Okay. It's a very elemental human desire, that desire to stand out and feel special, feel unique. And so I always say that narcissism is in fact an attribute that got almost every one of us Navy SEALs to the beaches of buds. The thing is, as you hit the beaches of buds, a lot of that goes away because you're humbled right away, you know. And I think a lot of the guys who might quit right away it's such a shocking reality to your sisters. Like, holy shit, this is not what I thought it would be, right? And they quit, right? But I think we have to be. And so I tell people, don't be afraid of narcissism. We all have it, okay? And oh, by the way, you can actually be high on narcissism. What distinguishes the disordered narcissist is the disordered narcissist always surrounds themselves with sycophants and yes men and people who always tell them what they want to hear, people who always put them on a pedestal, okay? And in fact, by the way, those groups are transient. You can't be a sycophant forever. So once someone decides to leave that group, that person becomes enemy number 1 of that narcissist immediately. That's how it happens, okay? So you can, in fact, I had a buddy of mine, he just took this assessment. His number 1 attribute was narcissism. Number 1. It's like, holy shit, what does it say? But guess what? His number 2 attribute was empathy. And then there was compassion. And then there's charisma. And from when I saw it, I was like, this totally tells me, because this is a guy who's one of the kindest, most compassionate, most empathetic people I know. He loves to be on stage, though. He loves to be in front of people, like giving and doing all that stuff. So he loves to stand out, but it's in a very healthy way. He never surrounds himself with yes men and sycophants. He's always asking for honest truth. So all this to say, I think our reasons for becoming a SEAL were an attempt to find our why. And I think some of us, fortunately, found some of our why inside the SEAL teams. Part of that certainly for us was, and it certainly for me, was just the teaming part of it. I mean, that brotherhood, that teaming aspect was just so real and valid for me. Still is. So with be able to talk to guys like you, talk to team guys I went to combat with who live here in Virginia Beach. It's still very real. But I think a lot of us as human beings, we go down pathways in an attempt to find our why, thinking that that's our why, but it's not really our why. We're throwing ourselves in environments to see if that is our why, which is why the work of figuring out what it truly is in fact, I think, pretty good and honest work.
Oh yeah. Oh man, it's raw. As I know you're aware, the Honor Foundation, which for those who are listening, that's a special operations transition foundation, and part of that is finding your why. And you sit down and you tell some stories about how you showed up in life when things were chaotic, and you answer a whole lot of questions. And it was illuminating, to say the least, when I went through that. So, if you're looking to find your why, for the audience, if you're looking to find your why, pick up Simon Sinek's book, look up Rich, and find out more there about what Rich is doing, which leads me to the next question. Tell me more about this next book, man.
Next book. Okay. So next book you're going to love because it's called Masters of Uncertainty. Okay.
Masters of Uncertainty. I think I said Master of Chaos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Step-by-step way to turn stress into success. Forward by Andrew Huberman. So that's great.
Oh man, look at that.
But the idea is I've always been really interested with how we step into uncertainty. So here's the story. So it was probably 2017. I was asked by a friend of mine to go to this planning session for one of these big consulting firms. This one guy from this consulting firm wanted to put together a day, a kind of a high performance day. So he was bringing in a bunch of performers that he felt like we could talk about and maybe create this day. So my buddy said, "Hey, come with me on this because you have such experience on this." And I said, "Hey, there's going to be a neuroscientist there that you're going to get along with immediately. His name is Andrew Huberman." And so I went there. It was me. David Goggins was there too. I had actually David and I realized we'd served together years ago in Iraq. But it was right before he actually released his Can't Hurt Me book. But so we were all there. But Andrew and I immediately gelled, and we began to talk about and try to think about what it is that propels or drives someone in uncertainty and fear and challenge and stress. He at the time was running his lab in Stanford. And he had a fear lab, and he had this room, a VR room, which I actually went to visit. I took my kids to visit. You basically he put VR headset on a participant, and in that headset you could be diving with great white sharks. You could be up at the top of two buildings, walking across the tightrope. You could be attacked by spiders, all that stuff. Right?
I've done the walking across the plank at like 100 stories.
Yeah,
dude,
right.
That was so bizarre. I knew
yes,
inside my skin that I was in my living room, and then walking out there, my body still reacted the same way. That it was insane.
Yeah, and I hate heights, by the way.
I do too. I despise them.
Skydiving was always tough for me, but anyway, he was studying this. He was studying the physiological and neurological responses that happen when a human being is in that situation. And what he and I began, because he was like, "Hey, how do you guys do it? Like, what do you guys do?" And that's when we began to really deconstruct kind of neurologically and physiologically what it takes to, in fact, step into and through uncertainty, challenge, and stress. And so in developing that, what's funny is the story is we began to actually, we decided we were going to write a book together. And so we went out, we found an agent in New York, and we got signed, and they're like, she's like, "Okay, I want to work with you guys." And in the process, Andrew had already just made a deal for a solo book, okay, which is no big whoop, except when you do a book deal, it's almost every time the publisher is going to make you sign something that says you're not allowed to write another book until a year after you do this one that you've agreed to.
Yeah, kind of like Andrew breathe, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. So Andrew and I were looking at it. I was like, "Well, that's a long time." And Andrew was like, "Hey, why don't you write a solo book while I do my solo book?" And I was like, "Okay, cool." That was the spawn of the attributes. That's how the attributes came about, right? So all this to say, a lot of the work, and of course, Andrew, my book came out the same month as Andrew started his podcast. So he took a little bit of a pivot there, thankfully, because he's so good in the space, right? But this stuff in this book is some of the same stuff he and I worked on in terms of how we neurologically operate and how we can actually hack into the ability to step into uncertainty, challenge, and stress. And then what are those things we have to know about ourselves that influence our behavior in uncertainty, challenge, and stress? One of them is obviously attributes. 2 is identities. 3 are those objectives that we create. What are we going for? In other words, an objective for us was become a Navy SEAL. Okay. That was the objective. So in Hell Week, that objective was always in the ether. I mean, it was guiding, or it was our cardinal direction, right? We might not be paying attention to it in the moment, but it was our cardinal direction of kind of why we were doing what we were doing. And then of course the neurological aspect of this, how does our brain operate? What are those things that our brain is looking for in uncertainty, challenge, and stress, and how do we hack into that so it can more effectively move through? So it's really kind of a handbook. And I also talk about doing it in teams. I kept it kind of Bill McRaven size, 27,000 words, really kind of small. You could take on an airplane. But yeah, I'll send you a copy once.
Please. Oh man, that'd be awesome. And that comes out again when?
So it should be available to purchase in December. It'll come out in February when it's on Amazon and all that stuff. So
gotcha.
So we'll make some announcements and things.
Definitely want to help to promote that when it comes out, and I'm sure our listeners will want to get their hands on it. And I think I just got to back up, kind of related, just talking about books. I think we originally connected, Rich, because for our listeners, Rich and I never had any overlap in the teams. We went through our timelines before I hit record, and I don't think we had any overlap. But I was actually reading Stephen Kotler's Stealing Fire.
Yeah.
And I reached out about something else, and I said that I'd read that book, and he's like, I think, aren't you Commander Richards or something in that book?
Yeah,
yeah, Rich Davis. Okay. I was like, when you said that, I was like, Stephen didn't use too much imagination with the name. So another book and another great author that you know. But hey, Rich, this has been awesome, man. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want to make sure our audience hears?
No, I think we discussed it all, John. I appreciate it. We will get you a coupon code for your audience if they're interested in taking the attributes assessments.
Please.
I will say behind you have a painting.
Yes.
And I think it's from Invader Girl, right?
It is.
Her name is Sarah. She's a great friend of ours. She used to live across the street from us. And so,
really?
It's good to see that painting. She's a brilliant artist. So.
She's phenomenal. One of my buddies saw her. I've been tracking her stuff for a while. She's got some fantastic stuff. And one of my buddies saw this with basically, if you're not watching and you're listening to this, the painting behind me is a meditating special operator. And one of my buddies sent it to me. I was like, damn it, I have to buy that one. There's just no getting around it. So yeah, Invader Girl, hey, we love your work.
She's awesome. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah.
So, but I love this. We'll make sure we do it again. I just love rapping with team guys because it's a great brotherhood. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, of course. And for our audience, thanks for joining us. Look up Rich, look up all the work he's doing, phenomenal work, and get that book when it comes out. Get your attributes now. But hey, Rich, thanks again. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I know this is going to actually publish after Thanksgiving, but for our audience, I hope that you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And until next time, take care.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.